Most developers think Claude's memory works like a sophisticated AI database. Maybe a vector store, maybe embeddings, maybe some secret retrieval system behind the scenes. But after digging through Anthropic's documentation, source materials, the reality is much stranger. Claude's memory is essentially a Markdown file. And the simple decision reveals something important about how modern coding agents are actually built. Because Claude's memory isn't really about storing knowledge, it's about optimizing context. And in this video, we are going to deep dive into the architecture behind the memory.md, why Anthropic chose Markdown over vector databases, where the file lives, what gets stored inside it, and what surprising limitation every Claude Code user should know. Let's get started and let's see what problem it solves. Imagine opening Claude Code every morning. Yesterday it learned the correct build command, your testing workflow, the architecture conventions, mistake that repeatedly break the project. Today it remembers none of it. And here's why. Every session starts from zero. The model has to rediscover everything. Build commands, project quirks, changes footnotes, coding preferences again and again and again. That creates a hidden tax on every coding session. Not because the model is incapable, but because the context disappears. So how Claude solves it? At the center of Claude's memory system is a file called memory.md. This file is written by Claude itself, not by you. The distinction is extremely important. Anthropic separates project knowledge into two categories. First, the Claude.md. This contains instructions, rules, conventions, things humans want Claude to follow. Second, memory.md. This contains observations, patterns, learnings, the mistake Claude has discovered while working on the code base. Think of it a way Claude.md says always run integration test before committing. Memory.md says integration test requires .env.test or use PNP test integration. One contains instructions, the other contains experience. That's a very different role. Now let's just understand where the memory lives. It's not inside your repository, not inside Git, not in the cloud, not inside Anthropic server as well. Instead, Claude stores memory locally on your machine, typically here. The project key is derived from the repository root, which means every work tree and subdirectory in the same repository share the same memory. And because that file is outside the repository, it is not version controlled, it is not shared across teammates, it is not synchronized across machines. Every developer build effectively holds their own private memory. You must be wondering why Markdown? This is where things get really interesting. Why would Anthropic choose a plain Markdown file instead of embeddings, vector databases, retrieval systems, semantic search? The answer appears to be prompt caching. Claude Code structures request in three layers. The system prompt, the project context, which includes your Claude.md, the memory.md, MCP context, the tools, and the layer 3, where the active conversation begins. The key insight is in that layer 2, which changes infrequently. A Markdown file inserted at a fixed position creates a stable prompt prefix. Stable prefixes produces cache hits. Cache hits dramatically reduce token cost. A retrieval system would constantly return different chunks that changes the prompt prefix, which destroys cache efficiency. Therefore, Markdown is an optimization, not a limitation. Okay, but what gets actually inside memory.md file? Generally, four categories. Build knowledge, such as use pnpm build instead of npm build. Project patterns, for example, the code base uses repository pattern. Environment details, like use the .env.test is required. And perhaps the most valuable category, mistakes to avoid. Things like never call reset database in tests, or the API is deprecated, or the event bus crashes under specific conditions. Once Cloud discovers these traps, future session starts with that knowledge already loaded. This seems to be too good to be true. Let's talk about the limits that no one is talking about. Memory.md has a hard limit. Only the first 200 lines or the first 25 kilobytes are loaded, whichever comes first. Anything beyond that silently ignored, dropped, no warning, no notification, no error message. So how Claude tackles this and what you can do about it? Claude Code includes an automatic curation prompt. When a sub-agent detects that memory.md is approaching or exceeding the limit, it is instructed to curate the file. However, the model may consolidate entries in a way that lose precision. You can manually ask Claude to create memory.md file, something like merge duplicate entries, remove stale observation, and ensure the total length is within 180 lines limit. Because the truncation drops content from the end of the file, the ordering of the entries in memory.md is load bearing. Place the most critical observation, safety constraint, irreversible action warning, mandatory test commands at the top. Put the incidental style notes, low stake patterns near the bottom where they may be truncated without consequences. You can guide what Claude accommodates in memory.md by adding a directive in Claude.md that instructs its own memory hygiene. For example, in Claude.md, you can add a section like when writing to memory.md, record, build, and test commands when you discover them, consolidate related entries rather than appending duplicates. Now, let's look at when to decide whether to go for memory.md or claude.md or what should be inside memory.md or claude.md. Firstly, memory.md is written by Claude itself, and claude.md is user specific, developer specific. A simple rule helps ask yourself, is this a rule or is it a learned observation? If it's a rule that should apply to everyone, put it in the claude.md. If it's something Claude discovered while working, put it in the memory.md. Instructions belong in claude.md. Experience belongs in memory.md. Understanding that distinction makes Claude Code dramatically more predictable. As of today, the Markdown file lives in a hidden local directory. I would not be surprised in a future where team shared project memories automatically synchronize across distributed development groups. The biggest lesson from this entire system isn't about the Markdown. It's about AI architecture. Most people assume better AI comes from more intelligence. Anthropic made a different bet. Sometimes the most powerful improvement isn't a smarter model. It's giving the model a place to remember, not through complex retrieval engine, not through a giant knowledge graph, but through a carefully positioned Markdown file sitting inside prompt cache optimized runtime. And that might be one of the clearest example of broader trend in AI. The future isn't just better models, it's better system around the model, the AI harness. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.